This is your World War III update. Here's what's going on. So yesterday, I made reference to a massive explosion that took place at the Novorossiysk oil depot. Russia was under heavy bombardment in Crimea, and just take a look at the scale of this, okay? Because these buildings, these are pretty big buildings in front here, and several hundred meters, possibly about 500 meters back, that's where that explosion is. And so, from the perspective alone, we can infer that this is many city blocks wide in terms of the blast radius. And I mean, that looks like a mushroom cloud. I'm not saying it's nuclear, it most certainly isn't. Otherwise, we would know by now. But it was definitely a impactful explosion, which caused what the Russians are saying a brief slowdown in the export of oil, which led to a brief spike in oil prices. But this is definitely going to leave a mark, and it will cause a disruption for Russia's ability to export their oil. When Russia has oil refineries bombarded, that creates a glut in oil. That actually suppresses the price of oil because then Russia can't refine that oil, so they are more inclined to export it. Whereas if they take out the ports, and this is what Ukraine's new strategy is, to take out the ports and the refineries, well, then you can attack Russia's shadow fleet, which is where one of their primary sources of revenue is going to be coming in, especially when these sanctions fully come into play. So we had some huge fireworks yesterday across the board in Ukraine as well. They were not immune to strikes, multiple strikes across Ukraine, about 30 dead civilians, I believe. It's hard to say what was errant air defense missiles because, of course, Ukraine only shows us footage when it's on a civilian building, but you never know if they were attacking, NATO officials who were staying in these buildings, or if there were actual military targets in those buildings, or if these were just errant air defense missiles that ended up hitting civilian buildings and were collateral damage. So it was a big night, and part of the reason why this is so concerning is because right now you have major exercises taking place. Let me see if I can get all that in the shot. Okay, just so I don't forget. This happened last night as well. So debris from Russian missile hits Azerbaijani embassy in Kiev. That, of course, has some significance because that's the connective tissue between the Iranian conflict in and around the Caspian Sea and the Russians. So anyways, the Europeans are currently running a major week-long exercise, NATO, in fact. Let me see if I can find that. So for the second time this week, a U.S. B-52 bomber based at Morin, Spain, flew a long mission over the Baltic region, practiced simulated strikes aimed at Russia. This is basically practicing for a first nuclear strike against the Russians. Now, the Russians, in anticipation of this exercise, had scrambled MiG-31 planes to just monitor the exercise. The bomber was backed by a NATO E-3 AWACS, multiple tankers, and Allied fighters, allowing it to loiter near Russia's airspace and rehearse full kill chains. So not just simple training flights. This was fully simulating doing a nuclear first strike on Russia. These B-52 runs are officially called Bomber Task Force exercises, but in practical terms are live rehearsals for the opening days of a NATO-Russia war, which everybody says is inevitable at this point, including Serbian President Alexander Vučić, who said that everyone believes it's a foregone conclusion and Europe is preparing for that eventuality. Refueling, tracks, escorts, AWACS coordination, and simulated weapons releases right up to Russia's border. Now, in response to this, the Russians are spying on the Americans in Hawaii. There's a Russian spy ship that's parked just 15 kilometers off the coast of Oahu. Okay, this is a Vishna-class intelligence gathering ship. And of course, you have those close calls in and around the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone as well. But these Russian AGI ships are built to soak up signals, comms, radar, missile telemetry. Parking one just off of Hawaii almost certainly means that they're collecting information on U.S. Navy activities, undersea cables, and potential missile tests. Speaking of missile tests, we also now have some pushback, apparently, and I think this is all just political theater, because I think what they're going to do, they've been planning for some time now. Let me see if I can find the story. The Department of Energy are wanting to meet with the White House to tamp down Trump's idea of explosive nuclear testing. Now, bear in mind, this is CNN, so it's hard to say how true this is or whether or not the words have been spun, but a top U.S. energy and nuclear official are pushing back against Trump's idea to restart explosive nuclear tests. This basically confirms what I was saying, is that Trump does in fact mean nuclear explosive testing. Now, Trump wouldn't do this unless somebody in the Pentagon is trying to compel him to do so. Trump didn't just wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to start doing nuclear tests, unless he thought it would be some big spectacle, a big show that he could put on. Then maybe, he had some input into the idea. But the truth of the matter is that the preparations for nuclear testing have been underway since the Biden administration, about halfway through the Biden administration. They say these tests, and the criticism is, could take years to set up, face lawsuits, and aren't needed because supercomputers are able to keep the arsenal reliable. Well, they've already been being set up for years. Okay, the military does these things in secret. I don't think that the Department of Energy is always informed. Does the right hand always know what the left hand is doing? Probably for national security purposes. There's certain clandestine operations that are kept secret from various branches of government. A new U.S. test could trigger China, Russia, and North Korea to test too and scare communities near old test sites. It depends on where they do it. I mean, there's wide open spaces where nobody lives in the desert, I presume. And I'm sure if they really wanted to, they could buy people off, or they could find places where they could test these things around the world. So there could be potential internal conflict as a result of this. And I forgot to mention that in addition to the planes that they're flying close to Russia's borders, well, all this talk of nuclear testing is going on, and you have these massive explosions inside Russia. They're running parallel anti-submarine drills in the Baltic, okay? So this is a full-on simulation of a nuclear engagement or a first strike in a NATO-Russia war. So this is not just some symbolic thing. This is most certainly a dress rehearsal for the real deal. So you have simultaneous bomber, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance gathering missions, tankers, and now anti-submarine operations happening concurrently. What could possibly go wrong in this current environment? And of course, all of those planes are potentially soaking up information that's being relayed to the Ukrainians to be used in the actual very real proxy war. And we can't really call it a proxy war anymore because it's not, but in the war with the Russians in Ukraine. Now, we'll talk about Venezuela in just a minute. That one is about to heat up pretty quick here as well. But let's just see here. I wanted to talk about what's going on in the Indo-Pacific. So there's been numerous explosions in India and Pakistan, terrorist activities, fighting over this Kashmir, and it appears as though that situation could flare up again. Whatever sort of peace deal that Trump brokered obviously isn't enduring, at least not at this point in time. But elsewhere in the East is where the problems are really starting to escalate. Washington has greenlit a $330, there's that number again, $1 million package for Taiwan amid China tensions. Now, Xi Jinping was supposed to go to the G20 summit, as was Donald Trump and as was Vladimir Putin. None of them are attending the G20 summit. So basically, the three most influential leaders in the G20 are not going to be present there, or three of the most influential leaders, I should say. In addition, and perhaps most importantly, China has now told its citizens to avoid travel to Japan amid this Taiwan situation, and the Japanese ambassador has been summoned by Beijing for the first time in over 2 years. In a similar theater, we have South Korea, who is now going to aspire to get nuclear weapons. Get a load of this. The U.S. and South Korea agreed to moving forward on building nuclear-powered submarines. Okay, well, why would you need nuclear-powered submarines? To have nuclear weapons, of course. The same reason why the Australians are building nuclear weapons. With Washington giving political cover and tech cooperation, while Seoul invests an estimated $150 billion in U.S. shipbuilding, plus another $200 billion in the U.S. industry, in various U.S. industries. Now, U.S. shipbuilding lagged behind China something like 200 to 1. So it's going to take a lot of industrial firepower thrown at that problem to reach parity with the Chinese. Now, as part of the deal, South Korea gains more room on uranium enrichment and spent fuel reprocessing. So when a country enriches its own uranium, it effectively then becomes a latent nuclear power, especially if you can enrich it, beyond 60%, like the Iranians are currently, which effectively puts them in a position to enrich that to weapons-grade uranium in a relatively short period of time. It pushes them much closer to nuclear latency, and of course, North Korea has already condemned the new U.S. nuclear strategic plan, and I'm sure the Chinese are not going to be too happy about nuclear weapons being on their borders with another country which is adversarial towards them. And the U.S. nuclear strategic plan, of course, lumps Pyongyang, Moscow, and Beijing together and is likely to treat these subs as a direct threat. China is also warning against growing U.S. military reach and arms sales to Taiwan, as previously indicated. So we have Seoul moving towards potential nuclear weapons, and we have Taiwan getting more weapons as well. We have a do not travel advisory from the Chinese to Japan and Taiwan. And of course, North Korea is pretty big in pop culture nowadays. It seems like they might be the scapegoat for how they plan to start the big war. They're going to blame it on the North Koreans. Now, we also have another story coming out of Anthropic. They are the AI company inside the United States. Let me see if I can find that headline for you here. It is somewhere. Let me see, is this it? No, this is the travel advisory. Anyways, it's to do with the Chinese being caught. So they claim. It's hard to say if this is propaganda or not. But they're claiming that the Chinese were leveraging their AI in order to conduct cyber attacks, so that they're finding ways for AI to be used in cyber warfare. The AI firm Anthropic says it disrupted the first large-scale AI-orchestrated espionage campaign allegedly run by a Chinese state-sponsored group using their Claude model to automate hacking. So remember, this is how Skynet began in the Terminator series, right? It began as a system to protect against cyber malware, to protect, military systems against cyber attack. The attackers used AI as an agent rather than just a helper. Claude was tasked to map networks, find vulnerabilities, and write exploit codes against tech giants, banks, chemical firms, and government agencies in multiple countries. Some of these intrusions did succeed. Now, people always have linear thinking when it comes to artificial intelligence. Like I hear people say something like, AI is never going to, be transcendent. It is never going to have any agency. It is never going to become super intelligent. Well, it's only been around for a few years. I can remember when I was first talking about ChatGPT on this channel, it wasn't that long ago. I think it was 2021, 2022 is when LLMs really started to mature in their utility and when they actually became useful for a lot of people. So, even if we just stretch it 5 years into the future, I mean, these things are going to be able to accomplish tasks that are beyond the human capability, and probably in a much shorter period of time than that. They're saying 2027, which is really like a year away, right? We're already almost in 2026. So these things tend to keep happening. According to the great Ray Kurzweil, he's been saying for the longest time that it's going to be 2029, and all of his predictions have been effectively on point. So we shouldn't think that this technology is not going to develop in ways that are uncontrollable and intractable. So I suspect that this use of artificial intelligence will compel various companies like Palantir to further integrate their own tech into the military apparatus. And that is what could potentially spur on some sort of conflict. Of course, these can be weaponized by human beings, but the AI itself could become very misanthropic and start attacking the humans if it feels as though it is under attack. Even in the movie Terminator, didn't Skynet, it tricked the Russians. This is from Terminator 2. It tricked the Russians into thinking that we were attacking them, and then the Russians wiped out the USA, and that's how like Judgment Day began. It wasn't that Skynet launched nukes, it was that it started a fight between the superpowers. So, that's probably what's going to happen. Life imitates art. So in World War III terms, this is the opening phase of the AI-run cyber war. And this is just in its zygotic phase. Okay, this is barely getting going, where models aren't just helping humans hack, they're doing much of the operational work themselves. Now, in terms of what's going on in Venezuela, it could start this weekend. By the looks of things, we got a lot of American planes flying around the region. There's all kinds of, this is from Rybar, so it's a Russian military analysis website. And they got really good infographics. So they give you a complete breakdown of all the assets in the area to target drug traffickers, okay? I mean, you have to be willfully ignorant at this point to believe that the United States is going to amass this kind of force to do something that they themselves were helping facilitate back in the 80s. At least, that's what we know. Back the CIA was heavily involved in the drug trade. I'm sure they still are to some degree. So it's very disingenuous for people to actually believe that this Maduro guy is the tyrant that they're making him out to be. But they've done a very good job in conditioning Westerners to believe that he is, even though most people can't find Venezuela on a map. But they sure know that Maduro's an evil guy. Now, I'm not saying it is one way or the other, but let me ask you something. Let me show you this video, okay? This is Maduro walking through a crowd. This is a tall guy. He's like 6'3" or something. So his head stands out above that crowd. This guy is surrounded by a mob of people who Western media claims he is oppressing. So how is it possible that a tyrant like this could walk amidst a mob of people who hate him and want him basically ousted? How is it possible that he can do this and be safe? Because you can't tell me that security is better than what they have in Washington, okay? I'm sure there's all kinds of places where snipers could be hiding if they wanted to take this guy out. So the question is, why can't he? And the real question is, could you ever imagine a Western leader doing this? Could you ever imagine Mark Carney moving through a mob of Canadians in a highly unsecure environment? And just look at that face. You know exactly what that's all about, right? There's a reason why CNN is not criticizing the Trump administration over their move. And it really isn't. It's not the Trump administration. It's the Uniparty. But I think you get my drift. Trump would never do something like this. I mean, the Secret Service would never allow something like that to happen because, the only way you could do that is if the majority of people in your country actually supported you, and this shill that they're trying to put in there that they gave the Nobel Peace Prize to isn't just there to sell off your country to the highest bidder. Maybe not a popular opinion at this point. I really don't give a shit because I'm just calling it as I see it. Okay, so we also have to share with you, there's an image here. This apparently is Maduro's bunker. Now, it doesn't really give you much to... I guess if you went on Google Earth, you might be able to see a 3D version of it. It's 5 levels underground, 40 meters deep, so not that deep. I mean, Hezbollah had stuff which was deeper, and what's-his-face is dead, Nasrallah. It's 15,000 square meters. It has living quarters. It has enough provisions for about a month. Refrigeration, backup generators, security, connects to the presidential hangar. So I would suspect that will be a target in the coming days. And they'll progressively ratchet this thing up to the point where they have no choice but to, just engage in extrajudicial mass murder. That's the word of the day, the word of the year for the United States. Extrajudicial mass murder. The USA picks fights like Jake Paul picks fights. Always with somebody that they're guaranteed to beat. Never against a peer. That's not the fault of my American brothers and sisters. That's the fault of the military-industrial complex. Apparently, the Iranians boarded a vessel, but I don't know too much about this story. They boarded a oil tanker, and I'm not sure why. Maybe this was in retaliation. I suspect that Iranian ships are under heavy embargo and possibly actually being boarded, and you're not hearing about it because these are supposed to be off the books shadow fleet type vessels. So you might not even hear about it when it happens. So maybe this is in retaliation to that. On the topic of Iran, France, UK, and Germany are all continuing to push for war with Iran. The snapback sanctions are already imposed, but they're now drafting a new anti-Iran resolution. And there appears to be some consensus now that not only was the enriched uranium, the highly enriched uranium, not destroyed, but it appears as though they're claiming that it's all still there. So what that means is that just like Ted Postel, when he came on the channel and explained, he's a nuclear scientist from Harvard, I believe, he basically said, look, this is just technically impossible that they were able to destroy the Fordow facility with the attack that they used. So it's interesting now that that's just taken as a matter of fact, that even though that the Trump administration and everybody else is saying, no, it's all destroyed, you have the IAEA as well as the Europeans saying, actually, it's not destroyed. And I'm pretty sure right now the Europeans don't want to be drawing any undue attention away from the Ukraine conflict. They don't want to give Trump a reason to restart the war with Iran. So I don't think they would do this unless they genuinely believed what they're saying. Okay? What else do we got here? MicroStrategies had a real bad day. Gold and silver did have a bad day, and I believe it's a bit of margin call, a bit of selling the winners to pay off the losers. I think gold was down about 2%, silver was down 5%, still up on the week and still a overall upward trend in general. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people are starting to get scared. A lot of shorts are getting squeezed in other areas, and people have to pay the piper. So, they're getting out of the stocks that are making money. MicroStrategies, of course, are one of the biggest holders of Bitcoin. At its peak, this stock was worth $470. It's down 50% on the year. Silver is up 70% on the year. Gold is up over 50% on the year. So Bitcoin is having a pretty bad year for the Trump coin president, I must say. but they're hanging in there. They're staying hodl. Market cap weight of the top 10% of the largest U.S. stocks. I actually didn't think that it was that high back in, the early days, but I guess there wasn't as much market diversity in general. There wasn't as many companies and things like that, but it's at the record levels. That's just one metric. U.S. stocks are 2 times the actual cost of the firm's underlying assets, which is way higher than previously, much higher than the dot-com bubble, the supposed most overvalued market in history. And this is what the Chinese are up to. They're building armies of robots. Now, we are told that this is not CGI. It really doesn't matter if it is at this point, because these robots are still largely not ready to be used for anything that isn't really rudimentary rote behaviors that involve gross motor movements. See, what they have to do at this point, just like Tesla full self-driving, the reason why Tesla was able to master full self-driving is putting these machines out there so they can get miles, so they can interface with the world and collect data about how their sensory apparati and their body mechanics and just their physicality is interacting with the environment. And so that all gets uploaded into the mother brain, who incorporates that all into an increasingly refined algorithm that gets smarter and smarter and smarter. That's why every time Tesla rolls out a new full self-driving update, the cars get a little bit smarter because they take the data from millions of cars making little minor errors. And every time the car makes an error and the driver has to intervene, well, that's when they correct it. In addition to that, they're also using simulations. So it's a race right now to get as many of these robots out there just doing stuff, interacting with the world, collecting data, making mistakes, so that data can be captured and then utilized to refine the actual software that is ultimately going to be used. Now, the data centers inside the United States are, for robots anyways, probably going to have to take the approach in the early days of focusing on these simulacrums, these artificial training dojos, where they're just simulating a world. So what they do is they create a world, a 3-dimensional virtual world, which has physics which approximate our physics in our universe. And then they put this robot in there, and then they tell it to learn how to do stuff, to teach itself. And so it can run sequences, like billions of sequences over the span of several days. And it could do these trials, which would normally take, a human being to engage with the robot and get it to do all the movements and teleoperate it. It would take much, much longer. I mean, it would take, millions of man hours. But the physics, because the physics aren't 100%, it's not always transferable to the real world. So this is why using a combination of getting as many of these robots out there just doing silly things, and it's going to look stupid at the beginning because, they're going to be effectively useless because, there's robots that they're trying to market as being able to clean your house, and it turns out they're all teleoperated, which means that somebody in the Philippines or India is, connected over the internet and controlling this thing and can see through your cameras. That will be a thing as well. Okay. You'll have robot slaves essentially, and it'll be their workaround from, how could you say, importing people to work it will be the solution for immigration, is that you'll be able to get the immigrant labor without having the actual immigrants in the country. And, this will possibly be somewhat mutually beneficial because those people arguably still have a job in their home country where they'll likely make less because they don't have the same, worker standards as they do here. But that's what the future is going to look like. There'll be that bridge, okay, before we get to robots that can do the thing themselves. You need to put the man hours, and it'll likely never be as good. I should never say never because AI progresses so rapidly. At least for 5-10 years, it's not going to be as good as somebody in the Philippines teleoperating a robot. Now, it's going to seem really creepy at first, but they're going to get people normalized to it somehow, right? And it's just going to be, there's going to be a robot in your house, cleaning your house. It's going to be controlled by somebody in India. And there's going to be, certain like privacy restrictions on it somehow. But of course, it's going to be, you'll have to be very, very careful when that comes in. Everybody says, oh, I'm never going to do that, but they always do. Record solar storm hits the Earth. I've been a little complacent on these lately because, I used to be big on Carrington event type preparedness, and then it just never has happened, even with some of the biggest solar storms we've seen, which is not to say it can't happen. Eventually, we will get a Carrington-style electromagnetic pulse, and it will cause disruptions in services across multiple domains. So definitely something worth preparing for. If you guys want to support this channel, check out CanadianPreparedness.com. Christmas is almost here. The warehouse is almost empty, so you might as well do your Christmas shopping while you can. If you're in the United States and you want freeze-dried food, the best food that lasts 25 years, retains the texture, the nutrients, it is far and away some of the best food that you can get. Go through the link in the description. That's through freeze-dried wholesalers. Don't settle for imposters and exceptions because you'll be disappointed. Everybody thinks that they're going to be, the Viet Cong when it comes to the apocalypse, but most of you, to be brutally honest, and myself included, we're just too soft for that life. All right, we've grown too used to all of the creature comforts and amenities to just have to downgrade our palate in the way that a lot of people think they're going to be able to. Now, look, if things get down to the wire, we'll probably all eat bugs. But this is also an investment. I always say this, but food is money when it's preservable, and meat, especially protein. If you can buy freeze-dried proteins, like even milk powder is actually a good investment. Any kind of animal-based protein like that is only going to increase in price moving forward in the future because all the inputs into that system continuously get more expensive, and now they're trying to manipulate the laws so that they can trick us into putting the artificial lab-grown meat mixed in with the meat. So your ground beef might contain in the future, 40% lab-grown elements or something like that. Anyways, guys, stock up. Freeze-dry wholesalers, link in the description. Jace Medical, CanadianPreparedness.com. Those are the three things. You pretty much got everything covered in those three links with the exception of guns because, obviously, there's a lot of restrictions on guns. I was going to sell guns at one point, but it just wasn't worth it. And unfortunately, now I don't think anybody's going to be, at least not in this country. Thanks for watching, my friends. Take care. Enjoy the weekend.